motion to open the meeting?
Move to open.
Second, all those in favor, open the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Great. So item 1 on the agenda is, as people on the committee know, and those who have followed us, we keep open for public participation. If anybody from the public would like to address the committee, this is the time to do it. Hearing nobody, which is kind of typical. Imagine that will change at some point. If there's no objection, I'd like to move to item 6 on the agenda, approving the minutes. This would be the minutes of September 24th that you were passed out. This was the very brief meeting that we
Yeah, I apologize.
had to approve the.
One more.
I have it too, I was just looking
Yeah.
at
It was a quick meeting, wasn't it?
It's under 5 minutes.
Is that a record?
That's absolutely,
It could very well be.
at
No,
least,
I bet you it was.
at least that length.
So is there a motion to approve those minutes, or does anybody have any changes? Motion, second.
Maureen?
Second.
Michael?
Michael seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Great. And I texted Roberta to see if she was, Thursday's a real tough day for her, but, so maybe we can slow walk things a little bit.
Do you want to do the invoices?
Yeah, unless there's any objection, we'll approve the invoices. I don't have them in front of me, Dom.
I'll state the invoices.
Okay.
The monthly vendor invoice package for September 30th, 2015. We have Compass's invoice of $12,271.50 and DRA's invoice of $56,865. Total for fiscal ending of September 30th, 2015 is $69,136.50.
Is there a motion to approve that?
Recommend.
Oh, excuse me, recommend approval or recommend payment? Second? Okay, any further discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. And you had a second for, that was Compass, right? So, DRA,
Yeah, and I have your,
we voted on them both?
Yes,
I didn't hear the motion, I just asked
Yeah.
for it.
it was one package.
one package.
I'll keep that in mind next time.
I was looking at how much we've spent and how much was left, and that was the interesting point.
So TJ, before, I just want to give it to you before, and then we'll sign it before we leave tonight.
Okay.
The signature page.
Great,
$683,127.
left in the, yeah. Thought that was interesting. Anyway, so why don't we get going? We could drag our feet longer, but just a little context, and then we can, I don't want to take too much time, but so tonight what we hope we would do is, since we're on an aggressive schedule trying to meet a December 2nd, if I remember
I
correct.
don't mean to be rude, but you could do this community forum.
Okay.
Yeah, I can just give you a quick update on the community forum,
That's
just for
excellent
those
idea.
members who were not there, and several were there, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Julie, also for being at both community meetings. We did 2 community meetings, and I know there was some confusion because we called it Community Meeting 2 for both meetings, but the community, one community meeting was held at the high school, the other was held at the town hall in the evening. Both were attended. I would say, I think we would wanted to have more at both meetings, but there were some very good questions at the town hall meeting, I thought. I know Carl took down some of those questions, which we brought back to our designs and started to evaluate. We are planning, and we'll talk about this when I talk about schedule shortly after we talk about design options. We are planning another community forum meeting, and I'll bring that date up at that discussion. I do want to tell you that I have been reached out, and also Joel, to discuss meeting out in different locations. One, the senior center is coming up. I know Joel's kept you abreast of that. And that date is, just to confirm, Joel, if you could tell us.
The 23rd, which is a Friday, 11 o'clock, we will be competing against the pasta penne lunch.
Okay, so we have to,
Talk fast.
well, you've got a Franceschi and a Tiberi.
Okay.
So,
You can check the pasta penne and see if it's good.
we know how to move towards pasta. Also, I was reached by the South Elementary School. They have on October 18th a Pumpkin Fest, and I apologize if I don't have the right title. But, pardon me? Pumpkin Patch, which is from on October 18th from 11 to, I believe, 2:30. I was more than happy to be there, and I'll grab some of the renderings, and we'll have a sign-up sheet, and I think this will be the first step towards getting out there. I know that some of the other schools have approached me, and Joel Harding has given me a list of upcoming events, and I think we'll try to strategize to get to the elementary schools, the middle schools, going forward. So. Sorry, Joel.
Tim attended the elementary
Oh, that's right,
administrators
yeah, yes.
meeting too.
Yesterday, Tim Bonfatti from Compass met with the principals of all the elementary school and the middle school? No, just the elementary school. I don't know, Tim, if you wanted to say anything.
Yeah, we really was in reaction to a comment that was made at one of the community forums about making sure that the community knows about, as much as possible, knows about our knows about our forums and getting the message out. And it's all about outreach. So we talked about how do we get, make sure that we know when things are happening, and if there's a chance to explain to people what the project's about, what the status is, to try to take advantage of that chance. So they offered to keep us apprised of things that are happening. That Pumpkin Festival, I think, was one of the comments that was made, and different things they host, things beyond schools beyond just the school community at their schools. So they would keep us apprised of that. So it was they were very cooperative, by the way, those 5 principals. It was very good.
So that wraps up community issues and forums right now. Next item, TJ, is the discussion of design options. And,
Actually, I know Roberta's here, but I think if there's no objection, if we could jump ahead to schedule update. I was going to do that if she wasn't here, but I think it'd probably be a good idea to go through that. If we're able to winnow down our options to a manageable handful, this is and meet our aggressive filings deadline of December 2nd. This is the schedule that has been mapped out to do that.
So I'm in conjunction with DRA and this committee, we're putting together sort of a work plan to get to our submission to the MSBA by December 2nd and to the board meeting by January. And Carl and Tim interject if I picked up or add to what I have for upcoming schedule. Our next working group meeting will be October 16th, which I sent that out yesterday. And that basically, when we get down to the manageable number here this evening, we'll have an update of the plans that are being reviewed for the options that we pick this evening. Also, by October 16th, DRA will be able to send those plans out to our estimators. We each have our own estimators, and we'll start to estimate the 4 options or whatever options we do come up with this evening. A couple of days after that, we'll probably send the new options are easy to send out, and then the ad reno will have to be a little more detailed. So 3 days later, those will also go to our estimators. The goal is that we will have a cost estimate by November 2nd. Let me back up. On October 22nd will be our next school building committee, and that will be a discussion of the evaluations of the plans, swing space, all the things that will occur between the new and the ad reno project. This is obviously, we don't have the cost yet, but we will have the cost shortly. So that'll be coming later. On November 2nd, we feel that the cost estimates will be done. On November, and it takes us a couple of days to reconcile the two estimates to make sure that we each have what we think we should have on those estimates between the new construction and the ad rental construction. On November 6th will be and I'll have to schedule this because I have it not scheduled properly right now because of the timing. Another working group session will be November 6th. And I'll send this out to everybody as an email also. November 6th, the working group will review the costs. And then after our discussion, we will send out the costs to the entire school building committee. On November 12th, which is our next scheduled school building committee in November, we'll have a reconciliation, and then we'll, as the school building committee, we'll go for the preferred option. We are tentatively discussing a joint meeting with the school building committee, the school committee, and the selectmen on November 17th. We also have talked about, and it hasn't been scheduled, but we talked about actually doing a community forum on the 18th, and we would be probably in the cafeteria, but this is prior to the town meeting that's scheduled that evening. Now, we understand that different parameters there, but we'll probably be in the cafeteria, the town meeting will go, and anybody from the town meeting who would like to come will be there earlier so they can come to that presentation. So the goal is by December 2nd that we will have the submission to the MSBA and that we will be in front of the board in January. Did I have everything, Carl?
That's good.
And
Yep.
Oh, that was great. And the reason why, sorry to surprise you with that, Dom.
no, that's okay.
The reason why I wanted you to run through that is because I think it gives better context than I could in a narrative form of the schedule that we're on and what we're trying to meet in order to, and the ultimate goal to be to file in December. Oh. The ultimate goal to meet a filing deadline in September and an MSBA meeting
December.
in
Filing deadline
filing
December.
December.
Yeah.
What did I say?
I thought you said September. But yeah.
You're probably right.
Just after you turn the lights on.
So the working group meeting, the last working group meeting, we went through, and I'm not going to go too far into this, but we went through and we organized the evaluation criteria. Those, as you might have seen in your email, went out color-coded, as Superintendent Rizzi has in front of her. The color codings were provided by DRA and were open for discussion to the working group, sent out that same day to the committee so that you could use those in your own evaluation of the 8 criteria in the hope that we can narrow the group down to a manageable handful. And the working group actually recommended 4 of them, which you might have seen in the minutes, which I'll go through in a little more detail, but not much, a little bit later. At this point, I'd just like to get on with the presentation.
Tom,
from
could you,
Carl.
I'm sorry, could you publish that schedule that you just
Oh, yeah.
ripped off there?
Ye-
That's,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's
I'll-
brand new as
Right.
about an hour,
Yeah.
so.
I'm gonna send it out.
So people need copies.
well,
I'll send it out
The same
electronically.
that was in the email.
Just like to see it confirmed.
So Rick, I'll send it out electronically tomorrow, and and obviously it'll be in the minutes too. But
I actually have a question too.
Sure.
Are we appearing before the Facilities Assessment Committee or the Executive Board in January?
We will appear before the
First-
Facilities Assessment
In January, in December, that's scheduled for December 16th.
Yeah.
That's
All right.
already on their calendar.
All right, so we're appearing
Yeah,
before the
we're-
FAS,
no.
and they're going to make the recommendation for the Executive Board.
Yes.
The board is at the end of January.
Do you have, oh, I was going to
Yeah.
ask for another one.
It's always the last
And
Wednesday.
there could be 2, you know,
Well, no,
there-
in January, they have one in the middle of the month. You're right, Joel.
yeah, there could be 2
Yeah.
facility assessment meetings,
Yeah.
but there is at
Okay.
least one.
Get one back?
Boom, 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 boom.
does everybody have a copy?
Yes.
Oh, sure.
I'll go through some of this fairly quick because you've seen it before, but I just want to put things in context as we look at the options and keep in mind that, you know, one of the ultimate objectives here obviously is to design a high school to meet the educational plan. And that includes certain relationships between the pieces of the program and certain, learning objectives and organizational objectives, and just to keep those in mind as we look at these options. And remember this tree here, well, we eliminated all the off-site ones. We're really down to the 8 options under consideration were 4 ad renos and 4 new constructions labeled B1, 2, 3, 4. We did modify C1 and 2, so they now have C1A, C2A, C3, and C4. There's some hard copies along the wall here, but I'll be projecting them also and just quickly go through them. And just to get oriented, we'll start with the ad renos first, so people understand the layout of the building, right? I think everybody's familiar with the high school, but we'll refer to, the cafeteria auditorium wing or the gymnasium or the A building or the 2 classroom wings, kind of in that sequence there. So in the options, the ad reno options, remember, are ordered from the ones that have the least amount of demolition to the ones that have the most amount of new construction. So B1 has the least amount of demolition, demolishing only the A building and a portion of the gym. And then B4, the last ad reno, has the most demolition. So B1 requires some modular classrooms, and these are just shown schematically. There's actually many more than that are needed. Basically, the objective is to have enough modulars to replace, one wing of the building at a time. So the A building, the B building, C building, which have roughly, the maximum like 20 classrooms in some of those. And we'll get into this in a little more detail as we move forward. But in order to do this phase kind of construction, we need to obviously empty out a building entirely, utilize modulars as alternative space for generally 1 6-month period. So it's sort of half of a school year in part of a summer. That's the optimal way to think of it, I guess, in each case. And then the areas in blue would get renovated. The areas in white are new construction. And as we said, in all of these options, one of the driving forces is the existing gym is inadequate, and there's no way to renovate it to, reasonably to make it large enough, because it's both the width of it and the length of it. The length structurally you could add a bay, but the width there's no way to really widen it. In essence, you're demolishing it and rebuilding it. So it's best to think of it as new construction. So in the B1 option, it proposes, here's a floor plan view of it now, constructing a new gym, a 2-story structure so that the locker rooms, the weight room, fitness room are on the ground floor, the gym is on the upper floor. And it's built basically on the parking lot on the cafeteria side of the building there. So in addition to requiring modulars, it requires some temporary parking too, because the parking is getting displaced during this, and probably the entire parking lot, because the contractor needs some area to work in just for logistics of constructing that. So again, remember, in all these phases, the contractor's activities would be segregated and limited to a certain area while the rest of the school stays in operation. So the first phase here, the gym gets constructed, the modulars get installed, and as soon as these are ready to be occupied, then we can start with demolishing parts of the building, in this case the A building, relocate those teachers and administrators and kids into the modulars so that that part can be demolished, and then a new sort of connector to join the 2 wings together can be constructed. The notion of reusing the gym in this option is to turn it into the library media center. It's about the right size, actually, the way it is now. The size of it, it's a nice volume. You could get light into it. The space down below could be converted into some classrooms. Again, we'd have to add windows on a couple sides, 3 sides. This side's a little bit hard. The ground's sloping. We get windows here and here to make those usable classroom spaces on the lower level. There's really an excess of space. That's why we're suggesting demolishing the portion of the gym that's the current weight room and fitness room there, and doing a new end wall to get light in. So that's the overall layout of the building. It would require several phases because there are only enough modulars to do a piece at a time. So one phase would be this, another phase would be this, another phase would be this wing there. And the cafeteria and auditorium, the strategy is typically to renovate those during summers so that during the school year they're always available to students. And even that, there'll be some compromises there. Our experience has been that, we sometimes have to steal like half the month of May and June and come up with some alternative food service. The cafeteria can still be used for dining, but the kitchen is taken offline to give a contractor enough time to fully renovate a kitchen and have it ready, by the end of August to start the next school year. So that's the notion behind that. That's the B1 option. And we went through, I sort of talked about the phases. We have thought about the phasing on each of these to make sure that there's, some reasonable construction schedule here. And in moving forward, any of these, all of this information would get communicated to cost estimators too, so they'd understand. In the end, you can see the building occupies, a very similar footprint with this addition. So the fields don't necessarily get reconfigured. The parking lot ultimately needs to be expanded somewhat to make up for the loss here. And so the tennis courts are the items that would need to be relocated on the site. But the layout of the football field and track and soccer field could remain where they are. Our assumption is, in all of these, sort of the operating assumption is that all of those fields get renovated though. Because again, we want to compare sort of apples and apples, and even if they don't need to be relocated, they would get renovated, to improve the turf, improve the drainage, improve the surface of the track, and so forth. The next option is very similar, but the one difference is the piece of new construction here is larger because the entire gymnasium would be demolished in this case. But the plan ends up being very similar. A new gym at this end, so you get the two major sort of assembly spaces, cafeteria, auditorium, gymnasium, all at this end of the building, and the connector piece just becomes a little bit larger and has a new library media center in it as opposed to renovating the gym. So otherwise, the logistics, the phasing are very similar. So there's a bit more new construction, a bit more demolition. Very similar phasing. These, the timeline for these are probably 3 school years plus summers involved, so plus or minus 40 months, somewhere in that vicinity. A number of phases, a number of barriers that are built internally to segregate the construction activity from the school activities, and those barriers get moved at each phase, off hours or weekends or vacation periods, so that egress can be maintained, circulation. When one wing is being renovated, the students here can still sort of work around the layout of the building reasonably well, and when this one's being renovated, students can circulate back and forth. In these options, by the way, where the library media center is part of this new piece of construction, there is going to be a time where a building has been demolished, which has the current library, and the new one hasn't been built yet. So there is sort of a compromise there, probably for, again, at least a semester period, perhaps even one entire school year. Will there have to be kind of alternative plans made for the library media center? But we do bring the gym online before the gym is demolished there. So a couple compromises to these two options. The third option now is, again, a little bit more demolition and new construction. So now there's a piece of new construction both here and here, replacing not only the A building but the classroom wing as well, and the entire gym gets demolished. So it ends up looking like this. So there's this much of the existing building retained and this much new construction now. And here the strategy is a little different, and intentionally to avoid the need for modulars to create swing space by building a two-story classroom wing first. So that would sit on the current parking lot while the entire existing school stayed in operation. So now we'd be building around 25 classrooms or so. So instead of leasing, in essence, 25 modulars, you're building 25 classrooms here. And now you can demolish a classroom wing or demolish the A building and relocate those folks here. Renovate, a classroom wing by working around the building in that sort of fashion. So the plan here is to, as I say, build this first and build a new gymnasium sort of on the footprint of this current classroom wing a little bit closer to Pearl Street, but again in a way that it shares kind of a common lobby and entrance here, so that you get a new access, because when you build the classroom wing here, you're cutting off access to the auditorium, but you could actually get it from more directly from Pearl Street and some parking on this side of the building. So again, it would be a 2-story structure, or actually 3 levels, but two levels at the gym with the locker rooms and fitness room in what essentially would be a basement condition underground, and the gym would be kind of at grade at the middle level. And then again at this end would be administration, a new entrance, and then a connecting piece that somewhere in here would be the library media center. And the phasing here, as I said, phase 1 is building the new classroom wing. Phase 2 allows us then to demolish this portion of the building, replace it with a new gym, new admin area, and keeping the existing gym in operation. So the demolition takes part in 2 phases. First that gets demolished, then that gets demolished. So once the new gym comes online, then the existing gym can be demolished here, and sort of the connecting piece made, and then the final phase would be renovating the classroom wing there. And again, when we talk about renovating these existing wings, in some cases it's fairly significant amount of work, because internal walls have to change. It's not just the finishes, the systems, but in some cases, especially to make it more equivalent. You see here how, and going back to the educational plan, the notion is to arrange classrooms in clusters, have teachers' spaces distributed through the building. In order to make that happen in these wings, this plan doesn't show it in detail, but we'd be taking out some of these classrooms and creating breakout spaces so that, in essence, this wing functions like this wing, to be more comparable, so that we're comparing apples and apples to best meet the education plan as we can. The other thing to keep in mind,
This option has the longest lead at 44 months.
it shows that here. I'm trying to think why. Yeah, I guess because of the 2 stages of demolition, Rick, why we thought it might be a few more months as well. The other issue here too is the science rooms are located in spaces now that are very small and need to be replaced. In the same way that we don't want to be without a library or try not to be without a gym, we want to try to avoid being without science labs. So some of the science labs would probably end up, both in these clusters and perhaps in this new piece of construction too, so that before these are taken offline, new ones have come online. And then we can perhaps minimize some of the demolition here by then turning what's now a science lab into a conventional classroom. Just take out the casework, redo the finishes and serve, but we can reduce the number of partitions that have to come down, as opposed to trying to blow out, in essence, all the walls where the science labs are in order to get, what's now 4 rooms into 3 or something like that. So that's the B3 option. The B4 option is taking this to an extreme now, where all of this part of the building gets demolished, saving only the cafeteria auditorium building, and doing obviously a lot of new construction. The entire building sort of shifts to a new entrance off of Adams Street. The side street, Pearl Street here, is at the bottom. The entrance to the auditorium would remain the same at that point. But the advantage here is obviously you're building a large piece of new construction while the existing school in its entirety stays in operation. The only little piece of sort of coordination is right here, that last connector, in order to make sort of a courtyard circulation, has to wait until this building is demolished. So there would be a sort of first year of operation when the school could be occupied and this last piece of construction is being built to make the connection there. In this case, we're talking about a 3-story classroom wing, actually 3-story addition throughout. The new gymnasium is located here, again, on top of locker rooms in order to minimize the footprint and make it a more compact. In this case, because there's so much work beyond the footprint, we actually did a site plan as well. So here's Pearl Street, here's the existing cafeteria auditorium, here's now sort of the new courtyard arrangement, Adams Street. The main entrance now is off of this drop-off area, off of Adams. Let me use a pen, I can point a little better, I guess. And the bus drop-off is along the side of the building here, where the buses could flow through and then flow towards the middle school, which is desirable. So we still are separating cars and buses. We get parking kind of on 3 sides of the building here. Now, as I said, the entrance to the auditorium remains the same. Service to the kitchen remains the same on that side. The gymnasium is inboard here, but there are connection and corridors that loop around all levels of the building on those 2 floors there. So, and obviously this option requires rebuilding the soccer field and track and football field, but they do fit on the site here and here, and we can get some upper parking here. We can get the track and soccer field there and the football field with bleachers kind of turn that direction there. And we maintain the parking that's down here off of Cushing Street by the middle school. So those are the 4 addition renovation options that we've developed. And again, we went through the phasing here. There's really 2 major phases. You know, phase 1, build all the new construction. Phase 2, do the demolition and that connection. And again, do the renovation of the cafeteria and auditorium to the greatest extent possible during the summers, so that it's always available to the students. And then there's the site work, which is really phase 3 once the building is torn down. So the new options, again, remember there are 4 of them. They basically are 4 different locations on the site and a couple different building configurations as well. So the first one is, let's call it sort of a linear scheme, an L-shaped, although the angles are following the property line. But again, the notion is to build an entire new school while the existing school stays in operation. The parts of the program that are taken offline, obviously, the parking lot here, and you can see how it sits over the track and a little bit over the football field too. So those fields would be affected as well during the entire course of construction, which is basically 2 school years plus summers. So, and then once the building can be occupied, then this can be torn down and new fields could be built. So the fields are out of commission for an extended period of time. Even though it takes 2 years to build the school, it takes another year, let's call it another season at least, to build the fields, another season for them to grow in the grass usually. So the athletic department has to plan for a fairly extended period of time without fields in the new options. Here's what it looks like from a site plan in the end. Whoops, that's C1. I didn't get C1A. You know what I did? There it is. We should go through just to point out the difference. C1, we originally had the main entrance here with car drop-off off of Adams Street, bus drop-off on this side of the middle school, and both students sort of funneling into a main entrance here. But it was felt that it's more important to address Pearl Street and have the main entrance be on that side of the building. And so we flipped it. The building stays the same shape, but now the main entrance is from Pearl Street. And remember, there's about a 10-foot change in grade here. So this would be a gradual slope down here. And the football field, again, ends up in a little bit of a bowl. Obviously, it's flat here and flat here, but the ground is sloped right along there. And everything in front of the school is flat. So by the time you get down to the building pad area, that's all at one elevation, basically. And so there would be a car drop-off here. Cars circle around, go back out on that side. Bus drop-off still on this side, continuing on to the middle school. Parking still wrapping around a little bit on 2 sides, but also the main visitor entrances would be in front of the building. And the way the building lays out in this case is a pretty clear distinction, obviously, between the classroom wing, again 3 stories arranged in clusters, and the auditorium and gymnasium wing, with the cafeteria and the library learning commons in the middle of the building, on the library being on the upper level, the cafeteria being on the lower level. Service entrance is back here, right there, into the kitchen. So that's C1A, as we call it now. C2 is now a different shape building. It's a courtyard building, again, built entirely clear of the existing school. You can see, again, it sits entirely on the track and a bit on the football field and tennis courts. It does leave this parking alone, so there's a likelihood that most of that, if not all of it, could remain for the school. So there's a slight advantage there too, that we don't take that offline immediately, but the contractor would, take all of this area in order to build that building. And what that would look like from a site plan point of view, again, we started with C2, where the gym and auditorium were on this side and classrooms on this side, but it was felt there are more advantages to flipping that. So the building's in the same location, but we literally flipped that plan. This is still the main entrance, access from Pearl Street here, coming down just the same way that first option did. In this case, cars could either, circle around, drop off, and go back, or could continue on through if they were headed, in that direction perhaps. Either way, it gives some flexibility. And then there's some parking along Adams Street within the property, not off the street the way it is now. And the buses are still on this side, the middle school side of the building, so they could drop off here. And in essence, there's kind of a linear lobby inside the school. So there's a front door and a back door. So if you get off the bus, you can enter this side, get off from a car, drop off, or from the visitor parking lot, you'd enter here. After morning arrival time, all the entrances would be locked, and visitors would be directed here. This is where the administration is. That's typically how all of these options would work, that visitors would be directed to the entrance by the administration. One of the things to keep in mind on these site plans too, I should have pointed out on the other one, we have been thinking about, one of the other reasons for flipping this is future expansion in the school. We have a couple options internally that, without expanding the building, that if the enrollment should grow slightly, there's some spaces that might be able to be recaptured with some reworking. But if a major addition were needed to be done, we wanted to think about how could that be done for each of these options. In this case, there is some green space here. We could extend this corridor and build another classroom wing, another classroom pod on 3 levels. If I go back to the other option, being a linear scheme, this could be extended, but obviously it requires relocating the track. But this corridor, again, could be extended, and you could build another pod. If a significant addition were needed in 10, 20, 30 years, something like that. So that's C2A. Now, again, the bus parking is on this side when after morning arrival or in the afternoon. That driveway is really closed off. In essence, there's just a parking lot there adjacent to the property line. And in the afternoon, the buses could queue up along here again. Students from the high school, students from the middle school could load on simultaneously and then leave. It gets the buses off the street, clearly separated from the cars. The C3 option is very similar to, in terms of building configuration, as the C2 or C2A. It just slid over closer now, you can see, to the middle school. So it occupies a little bit different portion of the site. It's a little bit closer to the existing building, but again, without impacting the school, it could still be built while the school stays in operation. It does steer clear of the parking lot here. Here's what it looks like in the site plan. And it has a different orientation now. It's a more, I guess you'd say, internal looking building, because the main entrance, it's accessed off Pearl Street, but the front door is really kind of facing this internal green space, you might say. So the administration is here. The entrance, if you get dropped off by a car, is here. If you get dropped off by bus on this side, you also enter there. You just come around the corner. So the administration is on the first floor here. The library learning commons is on the second floor. Above that, again, the 3-story classroom wing. The cafeteria is back here, kitchen access, and then the auditorium and gymnasium on this side here, adjacent to the playing field. So as we said, this one was explored mainly because of the different site dynamics. It now sort of puts this green space on one side of the site and this green space on the other side of the building. It has a different relationship, you might say, internally. A little bit closer, you can see it's fairly close to the middle school there. It has a different feeling on the site. There's also the grade change to deal with. So this is an upper lot, this is a lower lot, and again, this driveway right here from here to here would be sloping down to make up that 10-foot grade change. But then again, everything, you know, from this point on is all flat within the site. And then C4 is the one that pushes this notion even further of exploring a building more internal, where the front door is, I'm sorry, the parent drop-off is here for cars off of Pearl Street, but the front door is now on this side off of Cushing Street here at the lower level. So now we're putting the building at the point where the grade change is. So there's an upper entrance and a lower entrance, with some parking at the upper, obviously more parking at the lower, buses on this side because they relate to the middle school, cars on this side. Now all the green space for the high school, baseball, soccer, track, are all on this side of the building because the building is sitting on the current baseball field and that driveway there, a little bit of the football field too. So a different dynamic, a different layout. Now you can see here's the classroom wing, here's the gymnasium, cafeteria, auditorium kind of tucked into the hillside there. So that's the four options. Here's the matrix. I know you can't read the words here, but you have the handout. And I guess I can recap what we sort of discussed at the working group and how we collectively, you know, we took the initiative to sort of grade these first and then collectively had a discussion. In our minds, if you just look at the colors, we could get into the individual words if you want. And these are the criteria are arranged in somewhat, I think generally in the level of importance. So the ones at the top were the most important criteria. How the building accommodates the educational plan.
Just as a quick comment, what people have here doesn't reflect, that's an older version.
Yeah, that's a little bit older.
The working group has revised it quite a, yeah.
Yeah, I got to hold that one up there.
Right.
So that's from the earlier version before we modified it. We did separate out a couple criteria there.
And change some colors. And
Yeah. So the important thing is obviously that we wanted to measure these against how well do they satisfy the educational plan. And in that sense, even though, you know, we do a great deal of work on the renovations, the renovations additions don't score quite as well until you get to the B4 option, where we're building virtually, you know, 3/4 an entirely new school there, in our opinion. Whereas the new construction, which can be customized, can better meet the you know, the educational vision, the educational plan. And that includes things like relationships of the parts, how the building flows, getting classrooms clustered, getting the library media center central to the academic areas. Some of those items were in there in that evaluation. The second line, the project cost line, maybe Tim, Compass looked at this a little closer than we did, but you'll see it's all in yellow here. There's not really a distinction at this time among the options.
I can address that after you do
Okay,
this.
I'll go on. The other criteria, a major one when we're considering, especially if you sort of picked up on the phasing involved, that the third criteria down, disruption, impact on students and learning, you know, particularly during the construction phase, obviously, is significant with some of these addition renovations. Even though it can be, you know, reasonably done, and we have done it before, it is going to be disruptive to teachers who have to relocate once or twice, sometimes 3 times during the course of the project. Some noise, some dust, some vibrations, you know, despite the precautions. the fact that you need to use temporary modulars, which have kind of a, a less than ideal connection to the building and so forth, temporary parking in some cases. So there's a fair amount of disruption in all of the ad reno schemes. And in the new construction, by being able to build, the entire building virtually, or in all cases, free of the existing, they rate much higher. Some of the other distinctions in terms of operating cost, the difference here is with the addition renovations, we would be upgrading systems. We would be, replacing the roof and adding insulation to the roof in doing that. We would be, upgrading windows if they haven't already been replaced with insulating glass and so forth. But still, there are some issues of just the basic envelope of the building. The brick walls within that will not be upgraded to the same extent as new construction in an ad reno. So there's sort of inherent things that would affect the utility costs on an annual basis. Also, there are some systems like plumbing, in particular, some structure that won't be changed out. We'll still be using the main sewer mains and some of the plumbing risers in there. Certain things will have a shorter longevity in an ad reno than in all new construction. So that's why in operating cost or maintenance, there's a distinction between new construction and addition renovation. Then the next criteria down, that contextual fit, what we call collectively the front door. Obviously, this is more about aesthetics and also kind of image, how the building fits on the site, how it relates to the town, and so forth. It was felt, as I think I mentioned in a couple of these options, that Pearl Street is a more significant street than Adams, the side street, or and that's why the ones that front or access from Pearl Street grade higher here in that regard. The ones B3 and B4 or C3 and C4, which were more internal, were seen as a weaker kind of image, less desirable in that category. Flexibility and future expansion, I mentioned we went through that, on each of these, thinking about how they could be expanded, what impacts expansion would have, and there were certain differentiators there as well. With the newer construction, again, we could plan and allow for expansion in a little more logical fashion. Yes, the addition renovations could be added to again in the future, but it really would weaken the flow of the school or the relationships to have, another wing added in an odd location in some of these options. And then impact on abutters. There are a couple options where we're building much closer to abutters, particularly on Adams Street, than the current building is. That's why they score more negatively, or they, in the case of B4, the front door is actually on Adams Street, there's going to be more traffic. It's not just the building itself is going to be closer, but there'll be more buses, more cars, more traffic on that street. So that's kind of a negative impact there. And then the impact on fields during construction, again, that's a shorter duration. We're thinking about a building that's going to be there for 50 years. The impact on fields is a somewhat limited thing, but we did want to acknowledge that there is a differentiation there. In that case, the ad renos actually impact the fields a little bit less and less duration than the new construction. So when we looked at all these criteria, there were some that sort of rose to the top in our opinion. First of all, we should keep in mind that we want to narrow this list. This to take to the next step of developing plans in more detail and developing cost estimates. And MSBA would certainly urge us to make sure that one of those options at least is an addition renovation option. They don't want us to dismiss it out of hand so quickly without a little bit further investigation. So in our minds, the new constructions do score better on this evaluation here. And the two in particular that that we think warrant, further investigation are C1A and C2A. They offer somewhat different building configurations, which is maybe a positive to have options, but just in ranking them and scoring them, they satisfy the education plan best. They have some other good fit on the site, and so forth, in terms of flexibility and fit in the town. We think those warrant further development of the new construction options. Of the addition renovation options, we think B4 is the best in terms of meeting the educational plan. Obviously, that's why it has the darker green there in the top line, and then B3 is the other one that best meets that. So because that's the most important criteria, we felt like those were perhaps two. If we want to take 4 options to the next step, which is probably the upper limit of how many options we want to do. Oftentimes it's only 3, sometimes even only 2, but 4 is a manageable number, and there's some symmetry or balance, I guess, of having 2 addition renovations and 2 new construction options. We'd recommend B3 and B4, C1A and C2A. And I know cost is an important factor, and so maybe that's a good transition point, Tim.
So, as you can see in the grading of the cost, the basic conclusion is there were negligible cost differences, and I just want to fill people in on the kind of the basis behind that conclusion, because cost is obviously very important. So when we looked at cost, as you can see, there's no real design. These are sketches and concepts. So essentially, what we try to do at this stage is sort of look at comparisons to each other. In other words, we try to be consistent as we apply cost assumptions against each option, but we're not trying to predict cost at this stage. That's for the next stage, and it'll happen fairly shortly, as we mentioned about the schedule. So at this stage, when we look at cost, total project cost and then cost to the town, as far as the biggest cost component, cost of construction, what we look at is kind of what current projects are running at right now on a $1 per square foot basis for additions and renovation, for renovations plus new construction. We would look at sort of factors that relate to phasing and how much the phasing would cause, because projects that extend beyond a length of time have more overhead cost in them in terms of construction cost. So when we did that, we did worksheets internally at Compass, and we looked at it again, again being consistent that it's all $2015. We're not trying to escalate at this stage because it's not relevant to this conversation when we're trying to match up options against each other. We looked at sort of basic assumptions. So for the ad reno, when we did this, we took as the direction from the committee that as much as possible we would try to comply with the ed plan. So although there are constraints to that because we're dealing with existing walls, the renovation options were priced at or looked at by the cost estimator as basically apples to apples to new construction. So they would bring the building up to functionally and effectively the same kind of level as a new project would be expected to incur. So as an example, these would be, even under an ad reno approach, 50-year or more buildings. They wouldn't be something that would require relooking at 10 years from now. Again, being apples to apples. So, and that's something that not only this committee has talked about, but the MSBA would want us to do that. They would want us to make sure that we're dealing with a 50-year building lifespan. When we look at the total project budget, which is made up of the largest share, obviously, is the construction cost, we also need to look at the soft costs, designers and administration, and the costs that relate to soft costs. We need to look at the furniture and equipment and technology, and again, we applied that evenly throughout all the different options. We need to look at contingency. Every project has to have contingency. As you know, this is a business that you know, where we are today and where we'll be 2 years from now is, you know, needs to be planned for those kinds of unexpected things that occur, so we always look at contingency. And with ad reno, we would look at more contingency, because when you get into buildings, they tend to provide surprises in a more obvious way. We would look at, for ad reno, swing space and the need for swing space and sort of phasing premiums that the school might incur in terms of being able to occupy a building that at that stage is kind of chopped up. So on the other side, once we do the total project budget, then now we look at what's the reimbursement going to be from the Mass School Building Authority. And so the Mass School Building Authority reimburses the agreed upon percentage of eligible costs. They don't represent all project, they don't reimburse all project costs, they reimburse eligible project costs, which is a distinction we'll talk much more about when we, you know, talk about it when we have the costs in front of us. But we do know now, for instance, that the baseline reimbursement for Stoughton is roughly 57%. That's the baseline of eligible costs. The incentive points that they give you for various factors like energy efficiency, how well the buildings have been maintained, those sorts of things. We tried to do a sort of an analysis. We were consistent about how the buildings have been maintained throughout all the scenarios. When you look at reimbursement for ad reno, you get between 0 and 5, depending on how much is renovated versus addition, as additional incentive reimbursement points for ad reno. So on those, for instance, on B1, we basically included 4 points for incentive reimbursement, because it's so overwhelmingly a renovation project at that point, whereas they get nothing on there were 0 points for that under looking at the new construction cost. So we did that when we went through and we did all of the calculations, and the MSBA provides a form which is intended to be used at a much later stage in the process when you actually finalize the deal with the MSBA, which we're talking about doing in the spring. But we did a very shorthand version of it internally to provide you with this information. And what happened is when you look at all the costs at the bottom line, both particularly the costs as they apply to Stoughton, what Stoughton's share would be, they didn't differ in this, again, at this very preliminary level, they didn't differ more than 3% between the highest and the lowest of the cost. And at this stage, when we look at, in terms of cost to Stoughton, so at this stage, when we look at that kind of a gap, where we have really we haven't developed the design in any level of detail, for instance, to know exactly what the sizes of the additions would be on an ad reno option, or for that matter, even exactly what the size of the new project would be, we would consider that basically statistically roughly equivalent. Those would be, in our mind at this stage, roughly equivalent. So the conclusion that I would leave you, and we've talked quite a bit with Dora and Whittier, sorry about that. That was a mistake. Take it back. Can we edit that?
Other architects.
When we talked with DRA, we also looked at a project that is kind of going through about a phase ahead of us up in Billerica. When we look at it, that's why you see those filled in as yellow, not because it represents anything other than the fact that between all of the options, we would now say that they are roughly equivalent cost-wise. And from our mind, at this stage, we wouldn't put cost with those assumptions that we've just laid out as a factor that should really drive your decision-making on this as you consider your shortlist for tonight.
Could you give us a quick update between the two of you of where the school district offices play a role in any of these options? Are they all included? Are they part of the cost?
Yeah, in the program that we submitted, when we made that submittal, 2 weeks ago to the MSBA, the preliminary design submittal, we included space for the superintendent's office. We also included space for the cable TV studio, and both of those are kind of below the line spaces. Those are another cost that we know in advance will not be eligible for reimbursement.
Okay.
But they are included in our thoughts and in the square footages that are being measured right now.
Okay, so.
in
if
each
it-
of the options.
In all of the
If at
options.
some point in time we decide that we found a better place to put the superintendent of schools, that would affect the cost and the reimbursement.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
to our favor,
right,
hopefully.
right.
Great.
Wow,
Anything more?
it's a simple decision. Go ahead.
So, so if I can, just before I throw it out to the committee, I wanted to revisit what I said in an email when we sent out this, the matrices to all the, or the matrix to all the members. I wanted to make a point of emphasis that the criteria was, I mean, each member will have their own criteria on how they evaluate things. These all should be considered suggestive, including the coloration by DRA. But we drilled down on these and reordered them over the course of several meetings. One of the examples is, we were, actually, if I can back up a step, they were originally, there was a larger list, if I remember correctly, that was put together by Joel and DRA and
Might be the
Compass
next
meeting. That was
slide.
brought back to the working group. Working group reordered it.
Started
We have-
with, yeah, this many.
Right, there you go.
Yeah,
Emphasized some, de-emphasized others. For example, I looked at the list initially, and I can tell you that I didn't really consider disruption of the impact on students to be that great. Sorry.
Fine.
But, you know, Julie made a compelling argument in the working group that we lose an entire generation of students if we don't do the project in 30 months versus 40 because, well, without going into the different options, that, you know, we owe them a duty also, so that was bumped up from where it was originally on the initial matrix. And another thing we did at the last working group was that in the first category, the ed plan accommodation, there was also a category for expansion that we broke out. And now you'll see down towards the bottom, third from the bottom, flexibility potential for expansion. We really weren't as concerned with expansion at this point in time. And ed plan was always priority in any of the discussions we had in the working group. So consider all these recommendations, and when the working group, which is a majority of this group too, I should point out, all published meetings, all open to the public and the members themselves. If you've been through the minutes, you've sort of seen the progression that we've gone through in the discussions, and anybody who's in the working group can correct me or augment what I'm saying. What we try to do is, as we did with the site selection matrix, or the several site selections that we evaluated, is prioritize what was most important to what was least important, and then grade those out on a scale, and therein lie the colors that you see in front of those. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, about 10 criteria were most important and ordered in the level of importance that the working group suggested that they, or recommended to this group that they should be considered. And the coloration also reflects, after discussion, we've changed the colors through the course of discussion. Started with DRA's evaluation, and we changed some things, reordered some things, and those also should be considered recommendations. But the working group, through over 2 meetings and probably about 6 or 7 hours, I would say, if not more, came back and wanted to recommend 2 options for ad reno and 2 options for new construction, those being B3 and B4, and C1A and C2A. So that's the sort of tortured but brief history on how we reached this point, and what we were hoping in the working group, our discussions in packaging this in this fashion and presenting it as we have. What we hope we could do is reach 4 options, whether they be the 4 recommended or not. 4 options, as Carl pointed out, was a manageable number where we could drill down, get hard cost estimates, or at least harder cost estimates. I don't know how exact they are even at the point that we'll reach them. And Dom outlined the schedule that we're trying to meet, so those will take 2 weeks to do. So on that basis, we'd like to get to, if we can, 4 options. And then over the course of that next several weeks, hone that down to a final schematic. a preferred schematic. So with that, I'd open it up to the committee for discussion. Rick?
Was there a conscious effort to select 2 of each?
I would say yeah. Well,
Why?
well, I'll say this. Nobody wanted to discredit ad reno as an option, even though if you look, there's certainly more green in the, and I don't want to speak for the committee, by the way, so please, it's probably a good entry in how we reach things. Ed plan was always first and foremost in all of our discussions, but it was clear if you look at ad reno versus new construction, there's certainly more that meet the category of most advantageous in the new construction category than in the ad reno category. But at the same time, you know, we had to consider things that the process involved, and maybe the school is in the correct place where ad reno, as Carl pointed out, B4, for example, is almost a new building with the exception of the auditorium and the, so yeah, I would say there was, if someone wants to.
Here's why I ask.
That and-
Because I agree with B4. I agree with C1A, C2A. I don't think I can agree with B3 just because the lead is 44 months as opposed to 30 or 36. It doesn't actually meet it's not the best choice for the ed plan, which C3 is a better choice. And I would just think overall C3, when I match it up against B3, is a better choice. So I'm looking at one renovation, B4, and then C1A, C2A, and C3 is the 4 of kind of.
And I would chime in, I agree with that. From my perspective, you know, your entrance is still you're talking about front door, and I don't think front door is relevant
No.
to the average person in town. I think what's relevant to the
Mike.
average person, all right, sorry, Jim.
It's
Calling his name.
calling
or
your
tell
name,
him to put the
actually.
mic
So.
Well, yeah.
I like the
What's
shock electrodes
relevant
idea.
to the average person in town is that you're still entering with a car, primarily from Pearl Street. And I agree 100% with Rick. I think C3 is the absolute best option. And I don't agree with the red category that has been granted to the so-called front door in that category.
So it wouldn't, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It wouldn't be a problem then if we decided that we just wanted to go with one ad reno and dismiss that, or do you want us to come to you with 2?
I don't think it's a problem.
Okay.
I think the MSBA, you know, likes to see at least one ad reno
Okay.
considered.
Carl, could you put up on, can you
Sure.
bring back up B4? What I'm going to go to is B4 and then C2.
That's
maybe
good right
the
there.
Site plan.
That's good, yeah.
Okay.
B4 is a renovation option, renovation
To your gas
Right.
leak.
replacement option.
There's the existing, there's the new.
And then can you jump to C2A?
Well, I want you to come to the table.
There's a chair.
And I think you made the comment that these are essentially the same thing in the end.
They're close as far as the building.
Building
They're
layout,
different in where the entrances are, right?
right, but
Yep.
essentially
Yep.
we end up with the same thing.
Yeah, you end up with a courtyard building with a classroom wing and a cafeteria auditorium wing. Yeah, they're close in that regard.
Most of the
Floor
same
plans.
footprint, yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Carl, can I move that chair over here so Roberta can join us at the table? 'Cause
Sure.
wherever there's a-
Remember the old, make
That means
Head down.
that means
Move
you're
down
going to have
this
to
way.
move, Joel.
before
you
you
go.
drive 1 city mile.
We
gas
weren't
leak.
all in favor of you
Danny,
joining
this
us.
is calling your name.
The minute you said bring up B4, that's what made me think of.
We're glad to have you
Well, it
here.
didn't really make for a discussion if you were going to be.
At the end.
Is that what you want to see, Joe? Yeah.
Would there,
I have my own.
would there be a concern about B4 being a renovation suggestion? Because you're really only saving the cafeteria?
And the
it's really-
auditorium.
And the auditorium, but then it's really a new build. Just plain devil's advocate.
No, when we took a look at it, we took a look at this particular building is the newer building that's on the campus.
I know.
The old
I'm
buildings
just
that are
asking,
there.
what's the MSA, what would be the MSBA's view of this?
They might say something, But we're at a
So-
point right now where we're trying to winnow it down to about 3 or 4, and I don't think they're going to make a big fuss about it. I think it's going to, when we select something in the long run, Rick, that might come up, okay? But I don't, at least in my experience, I haven't seen it as a problem. Tim, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that B4 represents, as was made the point, a largely new build option. And I don't, you know, they don't want to tell a community you should look at these options. That's not what they're about. It's the process and making sure the process is correct. But you make a very good point that, you know, by you know, you've eliminated an option that, or you've only got one renovation option that really renovates, you know, the smallest portion of the school. It's effectively.
And from the
a new
town's point of view, for the eligible cost for reimbursement, you do get extra points for the grant if you do a renovation. You don't get the same number of points for every renovation. I think
Yeah,
you were
because
bringing that
it's
up the other day.
proportional
It's kind
to
of
how much of the
It's
proportional.
proportional by how much
So
building is.
where you might do no additions but a complete renovation, you might get an extra, I think the maximum is 4?
5. I
Five.
think if you save the
5
whole building.
additional points. If you save the entire building and so on and so
Don't
on.
add.
This one over here, we were talking about, you thought maybe 1, 2 at the most.
There might be some
I-
value, Rick, that you bring up that point. You know, in B3, because you're renovating a little bit more, just to answer the question of how much does it cost to renovate versus building new, might be a valuable piece of information for people to have, so that
Based on what's here.
they don't think that we've rejected it out of hand
That is a good idea.
before at least quantifying it.
I just want to make a comment to Mike's comment about
Yeah.
the red space on C3 contextual fit front door, his disagreement. The reason that I believe the working group decided to make that a red space, because originally it was not, is because the entrance is in an awkward location. You can't find it. And although,
Here.
Or you can use the
Thank you.
microphone.
I don't need to, I'm good.
You're all set?
Tried to follow directions. So the reason that it was red was because it's an awkward entrance, and although you made the comment that
Down
you don't
here.
think that most of the community would really care about the entrance of the front door, it's one of the most common comments I hear from those that are visiting the high school. I don't know which entrance I'm supposed to go in. I can't find the entrance.
And that's my point, is you ask the average person, where's the front door? They'll tell you the front door's off Adams Street, not off Pearl Street.
Right, they can't find it. They don't know where they're supposed to go. And I think this building here is going to end up with the same problem.
Can I add to that too, is that I was one of the people that put the contextual fit in front door higher than where it is right now, because aesthetics was very important to me. And, you know, by consensus, it dropped down, and I agree with it as it was submitted for recommendation. But it also is next to one of the ugliest school buildings the front entrance is next to one of the ugliest school buildings we have. And it seemed to me senseless to build, you know, this brand new, beautiful building and have the front entrance next to that ugly O'Donnell Middle School. Having said that, I'm also one of the people that said, you know, keep it alive, let's not discount it immediately, because you can do all sorts of things with landscaping and grades and certain things. And after discussing that a little bit further, I was discouraged that really you couldn't until there was a new middle school. You were going to have that building next to this building, and you'd have to live with 2 out-of-context buildings, I would say. So,
Skip B3 and C3 side by side?
well,
Not a question.
B3 and C3 side by side?
Consider B3 as an option.
Can I ask a question? If you kept the auditorium, are you keeping it because you actually get to have a bigger auditorium when you're at, because you're keeping the existing auditorium because new construction doesn't allow for a bigger auditorium?
We actually haven't gotten that feedback yet from MSBA,
But they'll allow it.
but it is one reason. The cafeteria is adequate size. It's actually bigger than we need. That's one value of keeping that, you might say. The auditorium, you can be assured you'd be able to keep what you have. They're not going to make it smaller. So in that sense, it does guarantee you that you'll have at least that size, whereas with the, and be reimbursed for it, I believe.
So they'll fully reimburse the rehab of that.
I
They won't-
believe
They
so.
won't say, we're only going to allow you
Yes.
350 seats, so you got to
Right.
find
No,
money for the
I
other.
believe that with an existing auditorium
I agree
like
with
that,
these guys.
right,
Yeah.
they would fully reimburse that.
All right, I can say something.
Mhm.
I'm gonna disagree with the disruption of the students. When I was at Southeastern had the highest gains of any school in the state on the
Oh,
MCAS
Roberta.
scores during construction. So I understand, I mean, I was in that school a lot. And yes, they're working down, and you're working in deep. Yep, the ceilings were all open and there was wires hanging because they were doing the sprinkler systems. That school ran fine. Seeing it and knowing the facts about the MCAS scores, I don't keep that red. I really think we need, and the impact on the fields to me is really a big issue. I mean, where are these kids gonna play for 4 years? You're gonna rip all this other stuff up. At least, I think we have to keep like a B1 and either B3 or B4 if you wanna keep 2. I think we should keep 2, and I think we should do 2 new. I really don't care. But I do believe that these costs are going to go down considerably. I think there's going to be a lot of concessions made for English classrooms, math classrooms. I think you need to keep, I think these numbers will change a lot. I think we really have to see the cost effect and still get you 2 new ones and add 2 ad renos. I don't want to just stick with 1 ad reno. I don't think we're being fair. And I do agree with you with the front door, because I went to the school, and you never know what went on that side to go in. Because you're not allowed to go in on the Adam Street side.
So how do you proceed and make a decision if you don't have costs based on what you just said?
Because we're gonna pick 2, and we're gonna pick 2 new, and they said they're gonna work on the costs. So by the time we narrow it down to 1, we'll know this is $10, this is $12, this is $13, this is
Or if
$14.
you eliminate one, that's a better choice now cost-wise, then you're
That's
going to
okay.
keep.
Well, I'm picking B, I'm
I know what you're
staying
picking.
B1.
But I don't know how you make that choice.
Well, I say B1 because I see how the design is, you're getting, I could be completely wrong, but I think that B1 is gonna cost less than any of the others. That's just my opinion. You get the biggest reimbursement, and I know the construction costs, I know you have to, but I don't believe the foundation cost for B1 is the same as C4, that says on the thing. I don't believe that it's whatever the price is, because the costs have to be so generalized. Right now, they're saying, they're basing it on square footage. If you already have 4 walls, if I already have the shell in my house, I don't have to worry about buying the shell again. So it's not gonna cost me $200 a square foot to build my house when I've already got the shell and the roof on.
You might have to replace one of those walls.
Right, but you understand what I'm saying, it's, a contract is special, you're still buying the shell. I don't believe the costs are going to be as high. And not to say you have to keep it, I'm not saying we have to do it, but I really think we should seriously consider something like put B1 on the table and put your B3 or B4 and 2 new ones.
Joel, he's been
You probably hate me for
looking to
saying
jump in.
Well, my point is, yes. But the top thing that we decided was going to be our driving force was the ed plan. If that's not the driving force, let's start all over again.
Well,
Everybody here has been through ad renos. We went through an ad reno at the middle school. It was atrocious, atrocious.
Plus there's the cost of.
And they never came into the building.
Right, to do those projects.
They never came
Then
into the building.
Well,
bills.
Well, and your portable classrooms are not reimbursable.
For another year, 4 years of that.
No.
versus-
Well, let me ask Tim. Well, let me first say, the reason why I discounted B1 immediately myself, and if that's, shame on me for doing so, but I'll tell you why I did though, is because essentially it's the same Franken-School approach to the high school that we've taken since 1926, adding a new wing and renovating what we had. It's the same thing. Essentially, what we have is an E-wing, right? And I thought if we were to do something good and special, then B1, and complying with the ed plan, then B1 didn't even consider B1 in my own mind. But what I wanted to ask Tim was, from a cost estimating standpoint, does that context of B1, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
About what?
Well, her point was that
You
when
think
we,
it's gonna be cheaper?
when we drill down on B1, that it will definitely be cheaper.
I think, I think that the seminal question that the group needs to decide is what Joel just said. If there's no question that you can menuize a renovation. In other words, you can sort of prioritize things, and you can pick and choose, and you can sort of say, okay, this is what we'll do with this. With every one of those choices, there's a cost benefit, or a cost sacrifice, whatever you want to call it. But you pay some, you're going to get a repercussion of that. So the group needs to say, as a group, because the only way these guys can design the next step for B1 would be they need direction that says, we want everything to be equivalent in terms of longevity. In other words, any system that is not going to last, whatever, 70 years, now buildings are 70 years. You have to design for 50. So you need, so that direction needs to be clear to people. And then in terms of looking at the actual spaces that can be saved or could be, less renovated because of what's the compromise that would happen to the ed plan, I think we need some direction that the ed plan needs to be accommodated. Now, I can tell you the MSBA will, they'll be critical to the discussion, but if a room works, and just because it doesn't meet their very specific thing, but it works, within, I'm talking about within a few square feet, it doesn't work. If you have, their requirements are, like for instance, science classrooms, they won't allow small science, they just won't. That's been a major thing at the MSBA. Every science classroom has to be 1,440 square feet. But if a English classroom was 810 versus 825, they'll let you, if that's cheaper because you don't take out that English classroom, they'll let you work with that. So there is a there's a possibility. I think people can leaving a wall is not where the cost is on a building. That's not the biggest idea, leaving this room. It's all the stuff that you have to put to make this room have all the technology you need and all the things that you're going to want to do as a 21st century school. But, so I think Roberta makes a very good point, though. If we don't look at some of these things, the people, you run the risk of people you'll never know. You'll never know.
Last one, I think impact to abutters is pretty important, and from your experience, is it a greater impact to have the building close to the abutters or the fields and potentially lights and things like that? Which, I guess, where do you get the complaints greater, Because I was looking at always where the building was, and it didn't really bother me so much that, because there's a lot of activity traffic on Adams Street anyways, I was thinking lights and
Impact
where you have your events and noise and things come out of that.
Well, I know on one of the options,
Yeah.
the wall of the cafeteria and gym, or the gym especially, faces Adams Street, which the people on Adams Street would see a big blank wall. Actually, Katie and I had an interesting discussion about that, but we could put on that wall.
You meant impact about us during construction, or
I didn't know what impact abutters. I was assuming
Meant
because it makes it
permanent,
sound like
yeah.
when I read
Yeah.
the thing is where the building. If the building's too close
it
to
is.
Adams
It was
Street.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
you're
I
on
mean,
Adams Street
the-
and you're
the
waiting in the
football
morning
field-
for the sun to come up so you can see it while you're having your coffee, that might change when you have a big building in the
The
way.
football field is an issue, but it's only,
I'll-
5,
I'll
6
do it
home
plenty of
games
times when you jump
a
in and
year.
look at it.
Yeah.
But it is closer to, these abutters,
We have the lights on a lot.
then, maybe there's practices on some evenings as well.
PJ?
But, if there's a loading dock and a dumpster and deliveries come at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. with the milk and trash out, that's an impact on abutters. That's tied to where the building is. So if that's closer, that's how we looked at it. But also, these are fairly small-scale houses, And so putting, you know, a big building very close to them just feels uncomfortable, you know, in those towns that have all the tear downs with the McMansions, that's one of the things people complain about is the scale of the neighborhood is suddenly changed and it makes their house feel inferior, or I don't, you know, what other adjectives. You know.
Dr.
So-
Rizzi wanted to speak.
The thing you notice, though, if you're in the building all day, every day, is the abutters actually, the impact on abutters now with the current situation is constant and I would say extreme. Because from 7 in the morning until 11 o'clock at night and on weekends, there is traffic on that street. So the drop-off, there's nobody in any of those houses that's going anywhere. During the day, everyone who comes and visits my office is making noise coming in and out. During pickup, again, the same thing. You're not going anywhere from 2 until 3 o'clock. Make your plans around it. The night school comes in, it has same thing. So obviously there are trade-offs in any way that you go, but a lovely new wall with landscaping and then all of that traffic moved to some other place might actually be preferable, depending on, you know, what your, if your windows are open in the morning, you know, there's,
Yeah.
so, so it's not as though a large edifice is necessarily, I don't want to say better or worse, but the, it actually might be a nicer lifestyle.
Mhm.
Can we see C3?
Anytime.
Please, Joel.
I agree with Roberta in some regard. I don't think that B1 is a really viable option because even though we're taking a look at modifying a variety of things, I still know that, at least from my view of the building and talking to Joel, that at least in one of those classroom buildings, the wall should have to be totally replaced anyway. So that might be not worth the money to put into it. However, I've always felt that B2 is, even though it has those red marks against it, I thought it was a viable option, and I thought B4 was a viable option. So in B2, it uses a good part of the building. A lot of it stays. If you can go to that, Carl, for a second, thank you. All right, right, no, okay, that's fine. But the important thing is it does get you the new gym, which is important. The classroom ring and the administrative area is a brand new front entrance, I think is good. I'm not totally convinced you need all those modular classrooms, but it's possible that you might. I think that would be closer to what we're looking at. Or B3, if you go to B3 for a second. That gets rid of the, B3, Joel, gets rid of our problem wing.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so that, to me, B3 is viable too. I don't know, I mean, we're not limited to 4. We'd like to do 4.
Well, I would defer to Carl on that.
Defer to
because
Carl
we
on-
have a lot of work to do in a fairly short order of time, and the
Our
more,
cost estimators too.
and our cost estimators too.
That's
So I think 4 is a good short list.
Julie.
I just want to point out, although,
It was a real
you
compelling.
know, Roberta has pointed out that B1 and B2 might be the least costly to build, they're also going to have the highest temporary and non-reversible costs. So you're talking about all those modules. So you're going to be talking about taxpayers paying money and getting nothing for it. So the building itself might be cheaper, but the costs associated with getting that building built are going to be greater and with no payoff.
How many classes are in a building?
No, more than that. We have our large group instructional space, and we probably have,
How many actual classrooms?
Yeah, maybe
10,
12.
3 on each floor? 3, 4, 3, 4 each have 3 classes?
there's more than 3 in each classroom. There might be 12 in a building. No, maybe 13, because you have one down next to the office.
In the office.
I thought there was only 3 on a floor.
No,
In A3.
No.
Maybe 1 in the back and 2 in the front.
no, there's a
One
ton.
there,
No matter what, A
One,
buildings,
the upper
two,
floor
no matter what
plans.
Roberta, A
4,
buildings have to
5,
go.
6.
No, I'm asking
7,
how
8.
many classrooms?
There might actually be
'cause
8
it's
classrooms
modular.
on A4.
We can
I
count
think
them.
I show it here.
No, because I'm just saying,
the media,
Where
Well,
the gym
that's
is
offices,
now,
right?
if it was turned into temporary classrooms, because they did do that
That's
down
the
the
lower
street.
level.
And I know it's not the most greatest thing to do,
1, 2,
but when you're
3,
there for
4,
one
5,
semester, the
6,
kids are there for 4 months.
7,
6
And
plus
then-
the
then
large
they're out,
group.
because they have a new class.
9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Yeah, you get kind of creative about it. I mean,
Right.
I've done
16.
projects where
Do
the
it right.
the gym has had temporary classrooms, the
16.
library has
16.
temporary classrooms.
Carl, under
Yes.
the removal of a building, are you including the media center as part of that?
Yes.
Yes.
So there's 16 classrooms, Roberta,
Okay.
and plus the library down below. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I make a comment about,
No, I was just counting for classrooms, that's all. I'm not
no,
trying to keep the building or anything.
I'm going the other end.
Okay.
Can I make a comment about C3 and C4? C3 and 4, from my point of view, one of my hats is transportation. In both cases, I think we are pushing traffic too close together, the middle school and the high school too close together, and we're going to have issues as far as traffic in the afternoon and the morning and getting buses in and out. C4 kind of pushes the building, if you will, into the West School complex. It's kind of going to preclude us from doing much with if we ever wanted to replace the middle school. Now we're going to have to find some different space to go for a new middle school.
Yeah.
And so those are just
Can I stop? I've never
Nobody
heard
really
anybody
likes
say
that one.
anything. Yeah,
Right.
can someone make a motion finally to exclude C4?
well, I'll do that. I'll
'Cause-
make a motion. to
Because that's a
exclude
good
C4.
idea to do.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion.
Any further discussion on excluding C4?
Probably.
All those in favor of excluding C4? Aye.
Aye. Roberta says aye
Opposed?
too.
There's nobody ever said any good things about C4, and I'm,
All right, we're down to 7, Carl.
yeah, please.
I just wanted to say that
Yeah.
as a mom of children that will be going to this school, hopefully, there's no other options except for B3 before C1A and C2A. I mean, you have to look at the ed plan, and my kids have to take care of me, so they have to have a good ed plan.
Yeah, but that's why I say C3 is a better option. But anyways,
Yeah.
let me just say this.
I think Joel didn't like the traffic in town.
Yeah, I having those two buildings that close together. I may be tired before this meeting's over.
But it's really close, that one is really close to the middle school,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I think that that's just going to be a cluster, and it will be too much.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad enough
That's
now.
just my personal opinion.
We're in the process of
We
looking at
eliminated
traffic now.
C4.
Yeah, I was tired of hearing people mention it, so
Okay.
I asked for a motion to exclude it.
Eliminate B1 also?
No,
Yeah.
no. We wouldn't do that, dude.
Not yet, not yet.
Okay.
I'm working up to it.
We're getting there.
I've got to say that I just can't, it doesn't settle with me that the renovations are cheaper than the new builds. I just don't, because
Like I said,
they take a year longer. There are a lot of costs that are not getting reimbursed, whereas with the new builds, they are getting reimbursed. You can build in place in a lot of cases, the disruption is less. So, you know, I included a renovation option, but at the end of the day, you know, to TJ's point, I just can't see us not wiping the slate clean and starting over and just trying to add appendages to the building, which was not a successful plan to begin with. So, and if you leave it in place, what is the heating value and the cooling value of those buildings? Because they don't have the same insulation value anymore. There's an operating cost increase to keeping the old buildings without adding, you know, going in and doing something significant to those.
Yeah, if we want to get the energy efficiency we're looking for, we're
Yeah,
going to have to
those
do some
walls
major
are-
work on the exterior
Those walls
walls.
are still how old? And how old will they last after this renovation? And there are the things that you're going to have to do to shore them up. They're porous, they breathe differently.
The next phase will, that is part of the next phase, is determining a operating cost.
I know that, and that's November 3rd, though. That's 3 weeks from now.
Well, why don't we get the ball rolling here, TJ, and I will move that we eliminate B1, and we have discussion on that.
Motion made. Is there a second?
Second?
Open for discussion.
Well, I think that the amount of renovation work that's going to be there, I don't want to say it's lipstick on a pig, but it's really, you know, it might come to a more efficient building. I'm not totally, I agree that the cost of renovation might be less, but the cost of reimbursement, what we get reimbursement might not be the same thing, so it may even out at the end. From a layman's point of view, who's actually done this type of work before, I've seen the impact on students, and sometimes if it's managed correctly, it shouldn't be too bad. And I have great faith in the school administration to manage something like that terrifically. However, I think that the renovation doesn't really meet or come close to the type of educational plan we're looking for. And in that regard, I think we should eliminate B1.
I would chime in that we should also eliminate B2 at the same time. I'll go back to what Joel said. You know, what's supposed to be driving this is a 21st century education plan, and neither one of those options meet the plan. While they may be cheaper, they may not be cheaper, you know, because there is a higher reimbursement factor, which is what I think the point Roberta was trying to make. They don't meet the ed plan. And if we're not going to meet the ed plan, then, as Joel said, let's go back to the beginning and start over again.
But the ed plan will change in 10 years.
Dr.
That's the way I look at it.
Dr. Rizzi?
That's the way I look at it.
In some ways, education is changing all the time, and it changes quite fast. However, it is never going to be the case, again, unless we're in a post-apocalyptic scenario, where small, straight, isolated classrooms along a corridor are going to meet the needs of students and teachers as more and more comes on their plate that students need to know, need to be able to do, that's highly sophisticated, the ability to collaborate, the ability to be flexible, the ability to work in teams, the ability to learn to communicate, the ability to be able to address needs that might be tactile as well as ones that are highly cerebral. This team does an amazing job with what they have, but we are in great danger of falling behind every single community around us and in the greater state, except for those in awful derelict buildings, and God forbid we should continue to be in one of those. But what we're not going to see is going back to the kind of configuration supporting contemporary education that we have now. We're never going to, just like we're never going to go back to the one-room classroom with 12 grades and one teacher being ideal. Education is going to change. It's never going to go back to that. It's never going to go back to what this building supports. If anything, we're going to be looking at things even more far-ranging that we can't even imagine now, but this configuration is just simply not going to do it. And we're doing our students a huge disservice if we're trying to figure out how to teach them things and for them to teach themselves things that other schools are well set up to do. Because in fact, the world is competitive and we will be competing against them and your kids will be competing against them. You know, so you don't want to have your kids competing against people with all kinds of resources to learn with when we're making the best out of lipstick on a pig.
Can I ask a point to order, TJ? If Mike made a possible amendment to Joel's motion, how do we address that?
Why don't we just vote on mine first, and then we'll go to B2?
I think we should vote on each option one at a time.
That's probably the better way
Yeah,
to do
So
it.
it's clear
Okay.
to the people at home what we're doing.
Yeah, and I had if I can, and I apologize. I mean, as chair, I sometimes feel like I monopolize discussions. So somebody please point that out.
Not yet.
I actually I see a lot of merit in. Well, let me back up half a step. I don't see myself ever voting for B3. And if what Tim says is correct, is that all of these are roughly equivalent in cost to the town and to the taxpayer, I don't see myself ever voting for B1 or B2 either. And B4, insofar as it meets the ed plan, I think that's important to keep in because I don't think we should discount ad reno at all. On the other hand, the context of having a full, true reno, cost-wise, if for no other reason than to give the acid test to the roughly equivalent numbers that we have right now, I don't think would be a bad thing. So I could vote to keep either one, B1 or B2, but I can't see myself voting for either one of them in the end. I would like to see the cost of a true reno, but they don't meet the ed plan, so I wouldn't vote for them because I know the cost of the taxpayer is I have a rough idea in the back of my head. And I can't really see there being much of a difference in any, well, I don't want to say it in that fashion. I want to say if all are roughly equivalent, then why not pay for something that's shiny and new? And that's why I shift over to the Cs anyway. But I wouldn't mind the context of seeing what B1 and B2 cost out at in hard sense. I can't see myself voting for any of them on the B
That's what I
side.
was saying. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but I think that we should, but obviously I'm the minority, which is fine. But I'm saying my
I don't-
piece,
I don't
and that's
think
fine.
so. I don't think so. We're having a discussion.
Can I clarify one thing, Carl? Maybe ask Carl to clarify. I know the cost, first of all, the costs are roughly equivalent because of what we know at this stage. They might not turn out, we don't know, because that's the next stage. Whether, these colors change is my point. I think in the ed plan, you're using the same sort of, when you say it's kind of relative.
Yeah.
Obviously, the renos can't be, because of the sheer fact that you've got restrictions, you can't have the same creativity as a new project. But we don't know that necessarily in the final grading how much that'll impact it.
Agreed. I agree with you.
Right, right. I think with a little more development, we could fine tune these and the colors may change a bit, We're looking at, we'd be looking at the layout, of these corridors and, is there a way to get it to be more like the new by opening it up somehow? It'd still be a compromise, but it gets a little bit closer to having some flexible space and distributing teachers' rooms and, kind of working within the shell of the building, but there's still going to be columns there. It's not going to be wide open space because of the nature of it and so forth. But it's possible that, what's now yellow could improve or what's now green might drop a little bit.
Yeah, that's,
My point, Joel, was, B3 does nothing for me at all.
B3 does something.
What is it about B3? Is it just because it takes a long time? Or?
Well, it doesn't meet the ed plan for starters. It does take a long time, and if we're not putting the ed plan in priority, we might as well find some use for the other.
We didn't say we didn't put it in priority. We're just taking a look at the relevant,
Right.
measure the relevance of one to the other.
Didn't do much for me on my
B3,
own
I
grading.
thought, came closer to meeting
I know
the
you
ed
like that
plan than
Right, 'cause
B1
it
or
is
B2.
New classroom wings.
With the new classroom ring, and I
At
am,
least, 2/3 of the classrooms
Yeah.
fall into the.
and I do like the idea about the fact that the classroom addition is now a 2-story addition, which is instead of a 3-story addition. So I think that has some benefit to it. We still have a front entrance that comes in off of Pearl Street, and the only thing that's really doesn't really match exactly what the ed plan says is the fact that we're still keeping one of those existing classroom wings type of thing. But thing about this is that there's going to be some give and take upon everything. We're never going to come up with the perfect solution where everything kind of falls into place. It's not going to happen. So at some point in time, we're going to have to make a decision. I personally like B3, but I'm not crazy about B1. And so that's why I brought B1 up now.
I feel the
just
same
wanna-
way. I'd like to keep the 4 that were originally. The more we talk about it, the more I settle on the 4 in the middle. I don't want to discredit B3.
I just want to make a comment about the ed plan. So although we don't know what's going to happen in 10 years and the ed plan will change, we know that the ed plan doesn't meet the building now and that B1 and B2 likely aren't going to meet the ed plan as well. And we weren't so short-sighted that we only wrote an ed plan that's going to cover the next 10 years. We have written an ed plan that accommodates for, although we don't know what the future will hold, the flexibility and the ability to change within those spaces and use those spaces in different ways in the future. So the new construction accommodates those changes in flexibility, and B1 and B2 don't. And we weren't short-sighted when we wrote the ed plan. So I want people to know that it accommodates not for the next 10 years, but foreseeable future, 50
Well,
years
I
out.
guess what my thing is like this, older, walls can be moved, things can be moved around, things, like, math, for example. I think my boys didn't have to have 4 years of math in high school. Now you have to. So if you're having a cluster of, say, math rooms, say your school just finished whatever, and you have to have 10 math classes. Well, now your 11th and 12th graders need to have math. So you know what? Now we need 13 math rooms. Well, 3 of the rooms aren't going to be around this. That's what I'm trying to say, because things are constantly moving. Whatever your vision is, but the state may have a different vision of what's required. Oh, now everyone has to have a foreign language. We don't know.
Yeah,
So
what-
that ed plan that's what I'm trying to say. That will
No,
constantly
wait a minute. I'm
change.
going to make sure that you interpret the ed plan correctly. When we're talking about clusters of classrooms, we're not talking about clusters of the same classroom. Is that correct?
They want to
Well, currently, yes, because that's the structure that it is, but we have planned for the opportunity to change that if we want to. So if we decided to move to a house model where
Okay,
you
well, house
have,
model's different, yeah.
where you have, a science, math, and English, we would have the flexibility to be able to do that in these kinds of pods that we have envisioned. So
Okay.
we do have the flexibility to either be by department, or be by grade, or be by whatever other configuration we can come up in
I'm
the
glad you
future.
explained that, because I was under the impression that the pods themselves were groupings of different classrooms representing different disciplines, which is the idea for having the collaboration areas in the center. Now I understand what you're saying is you're looking for something that can go either way.
Right. And
Right.
really the only thing that wouldn't be able to is the science classrooms.
Right.
Science class you
because-
can't move around.
Exactly.
So in the clusters, generally there are sort of general classrooms, including some smaller ones, small group ones, and a science room or two, so that it can go either way in the future. But in these wings, we don't have that option. I mean, most likely, as we said, we're going to build some new science rooms, and then there's classrooms over here. So that's what's kind of inherently a little tough to overcome in the renovations, and why they score a little lower now. We'll work hard to, as we say, to get as much flexibility as we can in there, but still we're working within a very, kind of limiting envelope. And also the other thing that, remember, the ed plan is not just about individual rooms too, it's about adjacencies and what departments are near each other. And some of these ad renos scored a little lower in our thinking too, just because of the adjacencies. The library's at one end of the building. It's not central to this group of classrooms the way we'd like it to be in an ideal kind of school. So, that's not going to change in that.
Still traveling to the other end of the building to get lunch.
Right.
Could I just throw in a comment? I do like ad renos. I've been involved in 6, 7 in my career in construction. I will say that 3 were in Sharon, 3 were in Mansfield. My children, and I did have this discussion with Julie, I said, my children had middle school, elementary school, and high school. They all went through that. But what Julie pointed out was it was a whole career of somebody's high school. And there was a lot of disconnections. So that really hit home with me. But what truly made me probably look to eliminate B1 and B2 is Mansfield, where I live, and Mike's principal there just came out with a report, a study on their needs for repairs, renovations, updatings for the schools. I got the copy of the report, $17 million. Now, a month ago we spent a $35 million debt exemption, but $17 million. So I looked at the schools because I was involved in the brand new Jordan Jackson and the 3 renovations. And the 3 renovations, and even though we were promised they were going to be like new, you won't have to do anything, the bulk of the cost to the taxpayers, and I think it's very important that you have to think about that, the bulk of the cost of those repairs to the taxpayers were on the renovated buildings. So on that, it sent a big message that, I am in a fiscally responsible job here in the town, and I looked at it and thought, knowing that information for less than 15 years ago, that probably $15 million were on the major ad renos, that how could I support that knowing I have documentation. So that's why I leaned with the B3 and B4 and thought, I don't want 15 years from now to somebody feel in this town like I feel and say, God, we were shortchanged. Why didn't we do something a little more diligent rather than put a Band-Aid and try to fix up something? And there's always something going wrong. We got new heating systems, we got new plumbing, we got all these new things, but now, $15 million later, my taxes are gonna go up here, and I feel a little cheated. And I was on the building committee in Mansfield at the time, so just from that personal experience, I thought, I, in my right mind, couldn't do this.
I wasn't on the building committee.
No.
The one thing that, just a quick comment, talking to people in town, the one thing they've told me is, I don't care what we do, we just need to do it right.
Right.
We're gonna do this once in the next 100 years. We've talked about 50 years, but in reality, in Stoughton, it's 100 years. Whatever we do, do it right. When I look at this matrix that we've made up, by doing it right, I am saying this is an educational institution, so it needs to meet the educational program that has been put together. If we go and say, okay, we're going to compromise our educational program and do these renovations, we're not doing it right. And I don't want to make comments about other things that have been done around Stoughton recently, but yes, I know. Is the overwhelming comments that I've gotten is, whatever you do, do it right.
The only reason that why, oh, I'm sorry.
The ed plan, Julie's
Yeah.
basically throwing away 12, 14 weeks of her life that she'll never get back.
The reason why I was suggesting, and I sort of angled towards where Roberta was going, is because I think there will be people in the public that will look at us and say, why couldn't you just renovate what you had? And I think, I really do believe the numbers that we've been told are going to come in and tell us that they are higher than it will be to build new, and it doesn't meet the ed plan, or I don't suspect that it will meet the ed plan. So keeping B1 and B2 in there, or one or the other in there, would what's that? No, but keeping one or the other only gives us context to say to everybody, it's too expensive, doesn't meet the ed plan, newer is better in this case.
I'm not sure I totally agree with you on that.
However it
Joel.
works out.
I like to call the question on this particular one.
No, actually, we have discussed it quite a bit, so yeah, we should.
We ought to get to the point where we at least
You're right.
do something on this one and then maybe go to the next one.
So the motion was to exclude B1?
Yes.
If I remember?
That's correct.
And no
It was
further.
seconded by Julie.
Seconded by Julie?
Julie seconded it.
Show of hands, because I want to be able to count. All those in favor of excluding B1, say aye.
Aye.
That looks unanimous?
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me.
I want to keep
Okay,
I didn't know which of the two.
It doesn't make a difference, it's one or the other.
all right.
So it doesn't make a difference.
Okay.
10.
So we've excluded the ends of the matrix.
All right.
Now we have to sort of narrow it down to the middle, I guess.
All right, so
Sure, please, Tim.
Well, just because you've excluded the ends, I don't know who, I know, at least in the working group, C3 was not strongly endorsed by people. Mostly because when you went on site, I thought as much, it's just so close to the middle school and it disrupts the site planning. So I'm going to take a leap and say that C3 didn't have a lot of support at that point. C1 and C2 seem to have very strong support at the working group level.
Well, I'll take the initiative on this, Tim, and say I'd like to vote that we eliminate C3.
I'll second.
Now, in a discussion on this, Rick and I, and actually you and me and Katie, you were with us. We went out and took a look at the site, and we walked the area, took a look around. And I happen to agree with Joel that the closeness to the middle school, I thought, was kind of made it tough, made it kind of a congested area type of thing. So, and the fact that the possibility of expansion is a lot more difficult there. I had asked Scott when we were out there what was the possibility of taking the entire building and moving it up to replace the tennis courts. And he pointed out you could do that, but unfortunately, there's an existing building in the way.
The gym is right there.
Yeah, see, that would
Existing
be a
building.
problem.
All right, I'll second that.
Already second.
Sorry, second.
right.
This is just for.
You want to move the question?
Yeah.
Right.
All those in favor of excluding C3?
Aye.
Aye.
All right?
Unanimous?
No, it isn't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
Okay.
all those in,
I'm a no and I'm a no.
all those in favor of keeping C3?
Do it
Yes,
again.
for the record.
8-0? 8-2?
8 to 2. 8 to 3.
8 to 3.
Who was the 3?
What was it?
9 to 2, sorry.
9 to 2, yeah. I was gonna say.
Gee, I'm getting confused.
For the
One
sake
abstention?
of argument, I'd like to move that we keep B2, because I think what I hear Roberta saying is that we owe it to the taxpayers to take a look at a major renovation. That seems to be,
That was, yeah.
Her
that was
basic
my only
point.
Yeah.
even though we know full well it doesn't meet the ed plan, and I don't know if it has an impact on budget or not.
Just to clarify, we don't know that full well. We don't know. So
We don't know.
I think.
But I think what she's saying is that we owe it to the taxpayers to take a look at it.
Yes, definitely.
I'll move that. I'll make a second.
But wait a minute. Should you explore that in lieu of B3?
Well, I was just going to bring
Because
that
right
up.
now,
Why don't we,
and B4
my real
or-
question to the architect is, and to the
Because now you're going to
construct-
have
can we
three
do, can we look at
renovations
3
here.
of them?
No.
5 of them, rather?
No.
No.
No, I would take
No?
it. I would
No.
make
Well, that's why I said it could have a negative impact on the budget.
How different is B2 to B3?
I want to get, should I make a motion to get rid of B3?
Oh, no,
We
B3
got a
has
motion
got
on
the
the floor.
classroom clusters at the end and doesn't use any temporaries.
Right.
Four better, though.
I like B3 better.
This
I
one
like
has
B3 and
modulars.
B4.
I know you do,
Yeah.
yeah.
B3 has new classrooms here in lieu of modulars and puts the gym here.
The only point is that when you compare B2 to the rest of the remaining choices, it doesn't compare.
I
It
agree.
does
but
not
it,
compare.
but it offers the most extensive
understand what you're
renovation
saying.
that's left.
But you're
Right.
saying that you're making the leap that it's cheaper.
I'm not. I'm
no.
saying that the argument here,
No.
and I'm not talking about cost one way or the other, I'm saying the argument here that Roberta's trying to make is that we owe it to the taxpayers to look at
Let's
a
look at
major.
it.
Yeah.
Aren't we looking at
Renovation.
B3 and B4 as well?
They're not as major, is my point.
Yeah.
You're not going to get the same amount of credit.
Now, I'm in the same
And
boat
B3
TJ is. I'm not voting at any point in time for B2.
Yeah, right.
Because I doesn't mean.
I know what you're saying, but I
The point
don't-
is to do the due diligence that the taxpayer
And I
expects
think
us to
that
do.
you should do the due diligence on every one of them then.
Well,
That's
then
the
we don't
point.
have a budget.
I know you don't. So, but we've got to make the right choice or the best choice here. Can I be CB3 again?
That's before, I
It's
think.
got classrooms here.
No,
in the
No,
gym.
that's B3.
Is that,
that's
that's
it.
what you
B3 is
asked?
what you
Yeah,
asked for,
B3,
right?
right.
Yeah.
You did say
Yeah.
B3.
I just want to see B3 before.
And how's that different? Let me see.
Classroom,
Get rid of B building
The
also.
back D building
See
stays?
the
That's the only one that stays.
B2, you keep both wings and you're adding a new gym here.
No, I get that. It's just
And
that it
using
looks so much
modulars.
real.
In
Yeah.
B3,
I can tell you,
you're adding a new classroom
Got a
wing
great presence in the front of the
and
building.
demolishing one. So,
On
yeah,
Pearl
this
Street.
is all new, you know, on Pearl Street. And you have new classroom clusters.
I see before too. Where's it?
Yeah, that's where we save only the auditorium then, and cafeteria,
Right.
and then all this is new. And the building is reoriented to Adams
Maybe we
Street.
should take a look at B2 and B3 and forget B4.
What's wrong before?
I would have to agree with what Joel's saying is because B4
It's
and
close to new
C2A
construction.
are the same.
you're right. You know, that's a
I
good
wouldn't,
point.
I wouldn't
So close to
disagree
new
with that.
construction,
that
Mike,
too.
you might as
It
well go
really
to
is a new
construction.
school.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think
just
that
think
B4 is
I
covered
agree.
with C1 and C2.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
right, that's right.
So, how
So you
about,
would say
And when
B2,
you would make
is there a
B3.
motion to exclude
C1
B4?
and C2.
Right.
So I'm
I'll-
making-
We have a motion.
Go ahead.
Wait a minute, don't we have a
Was there?
motion on the
What was the
floor
motion?
already?
To accept B2.
I'm gonna renege my motion.
No, that was Maureen's motion.
Oh,
No, it
okay.
was your motion. I
I sec-
second it.
And I'm gonna
She's going to
renege it.
take it
Yeah.
back. Okay, in that case,
Wait a second.
I
should
think
we
it's
make a,
withdraw, not renege.
Yeah.
I think withdraw is what you're looking for. Should we make a motion therefore to eliminate B4?
Second.
Yes.
Well, I'll make the motion.
Joel.
Eliminate B4.
Second.
Thank you, Joel. Joel and
Welcome,
Joel.
All right.
I guess, can I ask a question to Carl
Yes, Mike.
for purposes of discussion? If we eliminate B4 and we take a look at costing another, Does that preclude us at some future date taking a
Coming
look
back.
at B4 again, if we decide that further down the pike that's the direction we want to head? I mean, anything we eliminate tonight is eliminated permanently, is it not?
Well, I mean, certainly some of these are, 1 and 2 are sort of variations of
Right.
each other, and during the course of the next phase, it's possible that things evolve.
I mean, to get back to Mike's point, I'd like to
yeah.
keep it in our back pocket to save that auditorium if they come back and say no to a larger auditorium.
But
Because
you
we're
have that
saving
under
it
B, you
with-
have that under
B2
B3.
and
Oh, yeah,
B3.
It does say
B3
it,
will
that's
do
right.
that.
Yeah, we are saving it in B3. Yeah.
All right, motion made, who's second?
Joel and Joel.
Joel,
See the
second.
floor plan of B4? Joel?
Right there. Oh, the floor plan.
So is this one eliminating B?
Yes.
When we, in
I
the,
like that of all the ad rentals, because
Ye-
it's, the cluster's good, the admin's near everything.
well, in the working group meeting, the discussion that we ended up with is, this is pretty close to C2
Right.
in the end.
Right.
It's basically a new
That's what
building.
we're saying. and-
Yeah, it's pretty close,
Just,
so.
one of the things that when people usually look at these options, you don't, try to look at a broader range of options than ones that cluster close to others, because otherwise you would just, you'd end up with
Yeah.
the same thing. So.
It's an interesting
the-
point, because C1 is, could you put a
It's
C1 for a
different.
second?
That's one of the
Well, let's just take a look at
reasons
it for a
to
second.
consider it,
C1
is a different shape.
has got that kind of a
C1.
long shape, and C2A has got the
The courtyard.
courtyard shape, as you like to call it. So those two are different. And B2 and B3 are definitely different. And now that I'm thinking about it, and we're discussing it here among us, every time I take a look at B4, I come to the realization,
Right.
we might as well just do a brand-new building if all we're
Yeah.
going to save is that one section.
And B3 incorporates it.
Yeah,
The
that was the
MSBA
first
look at
question.
it that way. Is this really just a new building?
My
That's why it
question
meets
to
the
you,
red plan with that thing, the ed plan.
Tim,
Because it
is
the building.
we don't have to submit anything else to the MSBA. The next thing we submit is the preferred schematic.
No, we submit the four we've
We'll
developed.
do
show
submit
the
the four?
evaluation and why the preferred is
Why it got
preferred.
to
Why it
preferred.
got to be
Got it,
preferred.
okay.
We
that
have to
wasn't sure.
justify it and
Okay.
support it,
All right, so
We would treat the four that we shortlist the same.
Yeah, we'll create another matrix,
No, we
maybe
un-
with
yeah, okay.
more or different.
So I'm going to call the
criteria.
question on B, we're talking about B4.
Only the
and
chairman
exclude
can
me.
call the question if you want to get technical here.
You can make a motion.
You can make a motion to
Tom
call the
Joel.
question.
I'm the vice chairman. Can
Bill's
I
an
do
elder
that?
statesman here. All those in favor of excluding B4, say aye.
Aye.
Actually, raise your hand, please, so we can.
Oops, we got two people who say no.
3, 6.
Yeah,
so-
now you-
My hand's not raised.
Two.
I can't.
Now you're
say
8 and
it.
3
All
again.
those in
Eight to
favor of
three.
keeping B4? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Ooh.
So that's 7 to 4.
I would just make this statement that if these are cost neutral, I don't know how you could justify not building a new school.
We don't know that, though.
But
That's
if
what
they
we
are,
want to find out, Rick.
That's what we're going to find out.
and
at the next one.
with that statement,
Yeah,
you
but-
can't make a decision on any of these.
But why get there
Can't.
yet? Because we don't know that. We know at this stage they're cost neutral, but we don't know it. And we need to, we can't presuppose that the last four will be
I
that way.
have a hard time deciding how we make, what the criteria is for these votes. If the cost is the driver,
Well, I've got
we
get
these.
that. So,
And
so
as
what
a-
you're really,
as a
but
ta-
but
no,
what
as
you're
a
saying,
tax-
but what you're saying is that we should wait for the
think we have
cost
to
to
get
be
rid
done
of
on
one
all
more
of them.
No, you did.
No, because we're picking.
We didn't
it
get rid
is
of
going
three.
to be a
Well,
deciding
Roberta,
factor in what I
but
do.
what
Yes.
you're
No, I don't
saying
have
is
it.
anecdotal. You don't believe,
can
okay, I
just
get
say it? We
that,
got rid of
and I
the
have a
three.
different opinion.
Right,
I
we
think
do
that
that.
there's a lot more experience,
Wanna
a lot more cost associated with a rental, just because it takes longer, and you've got costs that are not gonna be reimbursed
You
versus
got a
what
lot more
Lucas was
costs
saying.
that aren't going to be reversed.
So
if you
count,
keep
count point
deals
account, and we
and
could do this all
5%.
night, and
I
it's
know
no
that.
point. So my point is that,
That's why
I don't
we
know
try
how
to
we're
go across the
voting on this
board.
without the costs on all of these items. I
Well-
just don't.
We will, though, because they will come to
Because
us
to
the
me,
next
B3
time.
and B4, I can't imagine voting for either one of those over a B, what was a B4, and a C3.
Well, as I understand it, we voted on accepting B2, B3, C1A, and C2A. Is that correct?
We
Yes.
haven't taken any
We're
affirmative.
down,
B1 is,
Well,
we're down
Eliminate.
but we eliminated the other
Right.
oh, we're
four.
down 3 right
Okay.
now. We haven't-
I would rather, I'd be feel more
Four.
comfortable if
Which
there were a
other one did we
motion
eliminate?
to-
Why don't I make a motion
Oh, we just
I
did four.
move
Yeah,
that the
and B1
building
and 3.
committee
We've down to
accept
4.
for further examination options B2, B3, C1A, and
Not you
C2A.
wanted
I'll
for,
second
which was
that.
by the process of elimination.
Okay, now we have a positive, now you start backing up.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Further,
For them.
is there further,
I
so the
did.
the motion was to keep for further and more intensive evaluation, C1A, C2A, B2, and B3, and it was seconded. So discussion on that motion.
I think, I agree that at some point in time, when these costs start to come in, we might take a look at it, and then maybe in a meeting further on, we could say, you know, maybe we ought to take a look at one of the options we discarded, because it looks like it might be a lot closer.
Doesn't sound like you can do that.
We can do whatever
That
we
was my
want.
question,
You
and
can
we were
do
told
whatever
we
you want.
didn't.
Do whatever we
It'll
want.
create a schedule problem.
It'll create a schedule problem, that's
But if
true.
there's some compelling reason, like you shouldn't go down a path if you think you're making a bad decision, like, because some new stuff comes out.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't recommend it, but it would create a schedule
I
problem.
guess the question I would have is, does the
Yes,
MSBA
we have
require
to,
a
yeah.
vote recommending
Not like
for?
we recommend.
Because in
No,
essence,
we're
through
not
the back
letting them
door, you've
choose.
already done for. You've
The
eliminated.
MSBA would want us to prove we shortlisted them.
All right,
Just-
so
You guys have done a great job, by the way.
So you're going to have to show minutes to say we voted these four,
Yes, yeah.
as opposed to the fact that we voted to exclude
tape.
four.
And
Yeah, I have never done that
I know,
before.
but if I don't have to vote for it, I
Can I-
go for it.
Julie, please.
I'm just having a hard time rationalizing why we're moving forward B2. I understand the argument that we owe it to the taxpayers, but on the flip side of that, several members of this committee have already said they would never vote for B2. It feels like a waste of resources and time.
This is why I was going to say this, because I know this is bothering, I can tell by your body language that this bothers you.
It's got to get out her special face so much.
And I saw all those fitness classes you've been taking, and I have to say I'm scared.
We don't want to have to run from you.
Well, at some point in the very near future, we're going to stand in front of town meeting, and if you've been to town meeting in Stoughton, you'll know that there will be people who will stand up and say, why are you doing a new building, or why are you tearing down 90% of the building and building essentially a new building? Why couldn't you just renovate what you had before? Now, number one explanation from this committee, because we've drilled down on it, would be because it doesn't fit the ed plan that we drafted up and took so much care to put together.
This is why.
But
This is
but let me finish the point. I think most people
Then
would
why
look
do we
at that
do
and
it?
say, what the hell is an ed plan? For starters, you're educating students, and also prove to me that it didn't cost less to renovate the building, because I think for some people it's just counterintuitive that it doesn't cost, that it costs more to renovate than it costs to build new.
You're
So-
back to the four walls argument
yeah,
that we're
and
building.
I really want to be able to prove that to people, because I really want one of C1A and C2A.
Just saying it
if-
costs more to renovate than to build new is what
That's
you
what
just
Could.
said.
We don't know.
But that's what he's saying.
Well, that's
it could.
what we've been told,
we've got
and
to
but
prove.
That's clearly the expectation, Rick.
But-
That's
but-
my expectation.
That's my expectation.
But we're working
Not
under
done
the
enough
assumption
renovations
right
in
now that cost is equivalent, roughly equivalent across the board, and if that's correct, then, you know, you're at a point where you're deciding which one fits the ed plan best, of course, because that's first criteria, and then if you're going just by this matrix, then C1A actually, C2A wins. But, you know, on some level, I just want to be able to tell people at town meeting and elsewhere that we looked at what you're telling us we excluded without considering, and it wasn't a good option.
Somebody's going to ask for an estimated cost of a
Sure, I'm
total
sorry,
renovation. Somebody's going to
Along
ask
this-
that question.
Along the same lines too, remember, we're pricing up this as well, even though we have no intention of ever doing that.
Yeah.
So there are some things that are being done for informational reasons, you might say, kind of analogous to knowing and confirming, you know, what is the cost of a renovation. We're going to cost up, what is it just to fix everything without changing any walls for the ed plan.
I went there in
But,
1950,
you know,
it was fine for me.
it's just a comparative number. It's not a solution. So it's kind of parallel to that line of thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you, Carl.
But you're correct, Julia.
And I have to
Some
pack
of
up, I'm
these,
sorry.
some of these we're actually going to look at a little bit more, so that at some point in time when we come to the right solution, we'll have something to compare it against and say, yeah, we did look at this. It didn't turn out to be what we were looking for. It didn't meet the ed plan, the cost, or that type of thing. So.
I mean,
And
ultimately,
anything is
can I say
possible.
something else? Ultimately, everybody in this room wants a new building. And I think, oh, no, 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 I'm cheap, cheap, cheap. But you know what? As a taxpayer, you work with people who are in education, want new school, want new school, want new school. At my business, it's funny, when anyone who runs for election comes into my office to run an ad, everyone thinks they're gonna win. Everyone I talk to is gonna vote for me. Yeah, everyone you talk to. But the guy who just came in after you has a different set of friends who are gonna vote for them. You think everybody's for the school, they're not. And if you don't show people, I could be, like I said, from the beginning, I could be totally wrong. The school could cost more than any of them. But if we don't prove to the taxpayers who are going to come out in droves and vote for this, who have never voted before. 25% of the kids are in school. 75% of them don't. I know a girl that I walk with, and she says, I'm not voting for it. I had somebody come into my office and says, I'm gonna be taking off full-page ads and going against the school. So you think everyone knew we're gonna need but if you don't prove to these people that, okay, well, you know what, so you don't get your little pod here, or you don't, I'm just being wise about it, saying it like that, but we can do it for X amount of dollars versus this. If you can sell the school for $10 instead of 13, and I know that I can sell it for 10, but I may not be able to sell it to 13, I'm gonna vote for the 10.
I wouldn't bother doing it then.
I thought you would be, your school would be considered,
Just fix it.
what's the word that?
Leave it, just fix it.
But it's way too premature to talk about this, this is
Well,
speculation.
but I'm
so-
going, that's why I'm trying to get it, that's the reason why I want
Yeah,
to show this school.
I frankly agree with your point totally,
and-
because I think you have the right
And that's
approach.
the only reason. I'm not gonna say I'm going to, but I'd like to see, and I think we owe it to the people who are going to pay for the school to show that this costs 13, and you know what, this only costs 12.
Well, I will,
That's the reason why I'm
Got
adamant
double
about
booked tonight.
trying to get a grasp of different
Covering.
things.
well, I agree with one thing, but I will say one thing, and I hope you'll support me on this. My kids went through renovations, and they didn't have any problems with it whatsoever. I know your kids went through renovations. I've been in multiple renovation projects where everybody was able to adapt to it and work out well.
did too.
It's not totally disruptive. There is some disruption.
Renovations and there's renovations.
Yeah.
But
I
our
mean, if
children
you-
didn't
Disruption,
lose 4 years of a high school
I
experience.
recently did a high school where it was 3.5 years of renovations and nobody really, had a real
lot more
problem.
knowledge in a month.
No kid had a real
You
problem.
know, some poor
All
ninth
right,
grade
thanks, Carl.
graduate
Thanks,
without
Carl.
having-
So, there's a motion on the table, and
Right, it's still on the table.
if we have any further discussion, I'd be happy to hear it, but if we've beat it to death, all those in favor of keeping for further evaluation B1, or excuse me, B2, B3, C1A, C2A, say aye, or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6?
4, 5, 6.
I voted.
6, and all those against, opposed, excuse me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to
Oh.
5.
Oh, that's close.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
Well, because no,
it's 11-member committee. I would like to say that I voted for it based upon representation that we can visit the other alternatives at a later date.
If it becomes compelling, then
becomes
this is the wrong
compelling.
direction we've taken, yes.
I voted for it because at some point, we're gonna get down to one, and this ain't it.
yeah,
We're not done voting.
No,
This is just
that's right.
And I
Exactly
voted
right.
against it because I think we're wasting resources costing B2 for an emotional reason, not an intellectual reason. This grid is an intellectual decision, and it's clear, based on these factors only, what direction should take. And I would say that we get down to 3 then. I don't think we cost B2.
Rick, you're presuming that voters will make a decision based on intellect, and my experience in 40 years in this business is they make their decision based on emotion.
I agree.
When they go to the ballot at
My
the end.
experience is that you're not going to change their mind one way or another.
You're probably right, I agree with you on that one.
Everybody knows what they're going to vote for today.
Can I ask a question to Tim? I know that, we're given the schedule that we talked about earlier, that getting pricing in was one of the next steps. That seems to be one of the central points that we're getting at, keeping B2 at all. Is there a way to prioritize that and bump that up, or is that just folly because, economies of scale, you might as well do all at the same time anyway?
Well, we can't, Carl's not here to respond to where he is in the design process to be able to do that. So I don't believe he can, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we're going to have this conversation in a month with the numbers in front of us is the best we can do.
And at that point in time, we might decide to look at another option.
To your point, TJ, just to speak for Carl, though, he's got to do, where new construction is pretty cut and dry as far as the scope, he's going to have to really narrate the scope of B2. So that takes longer than the new. The new will probably go out quicker and get estimated quicker. The reno will have to take a narrative to describe so that the estimators do a better job of giving you a better number at the end. So
If you had the ad rental, what are you comparing it to if you don't have the others? Right?
Tim, can I ask a question?
Well, I did figure that the new construction was easy.
That's right.
But
Tim, can I ask you a question? I mean, we're talking about jumping back and forth possibly between some of the ad renos. And you mentioned it's going to take more time. It would expand the time frame if we did that, but it would also cost more money. correct?
Yes, yeah.
So, and our budget right now is very tight. So.
In fact, it's expended.
Yeah. So my point is, if we decided to jump back and forth between different, we get more money.
Yeah, before you go there, I would see whether or not this is the way the process is supposed to work, the way it's working. You're going to get the 4. I was only making the point that if you were, as a group, wholly dissatisfied with the way the 4 turn out, you shouldn't go ahead, obviously.
Right.
If you can't find one of those 4 that work,
My point is if we try to jump around after we voted for these 4, if we
Yeah.
try to do a lot of jumping around,
it's time and money.
Yeah,
Yes.
this is kind of a starting point. I think we're looking at it, this is a starting point. Let's look at these 4, and I think the word compelling is the key word here. There's a compelling reason why we should take a look at.
I mean, it would have
Fifth
to be
one.
very compelling. I mean, it
look at
would be one of those things where we really can't tell until we see these 4 better developed whether or not you guys say, well, gee, there's a combination of one of these that I like more or less. I think we'll know. But I don't see that happening a lot usually. And don't forget, just because you pick any one of the options doesn't mean that what you see that day is exactly what will get designed and built. When they go through the design process, they got to design. So they've really just started the design, at that point, they've just started the design process. So you can adjust during the design process. Everyone expects that'll happen. The final design is the schematic design isn't until March or I forget the schedule. So there'll be changes. What you guys see is not the end all because the architect has to come to you with design.
So we could have changed the driveway.
Oh, you can change. You can change.
Threw out an option because of the driveway. I just want to know that.
But there's always going to be stuff that can be changed. I mean, basically, what you voted on are sort of the block diagrams you saw there.
Right, oh, no, the bathroom's here, no, it's there, no, we want them in the middle, no, we want
Yeah,
this.
as you're going to get more refined about how you're going to look at it, and eventually, hopefully, we have enough time for these guys to do their work so that we can make a reasonable
3 weeks to
decision.
cost these 4 options. I mean, that's,
It's not easy.
no.
No, but
Can be done.
but this is not. They take all this stuff from a computer now. It's real quickly inputted. It's not quite the level of.
When I was doing this,
We're not doing.
when I was doing
level
this
of
40
detail.
years ago, it's a little different.
all right. So just to
I just want to reinforce, because we are moving forward, and we don't need to vote on this, but we are going to progress the renovation options to meet the ed plan, because that is an important discussion. Yeah. So that needs
As
to
close
be
as we
clear.
can to the
Yeah,
end plan.
yeah, I mean, with short of moving
But that
exterior
changes
walls.
the cost structure.
Huh?
That's gonna
I
change.
know.
No, we don't know, and we got to get through it, but I just need to make sure the
Why
architect
wouldn't we have
is.
submitted that as an option then? If it's not going to be, why wouldn't we have these renos more closer to the ed plan than not?
Because
I think this is, as I was trying to say, is, what do you mean that they're not?
Why wouldn't those be more green than yellow?
Because relative to a new project, and this
Yeah.
is essentially new.
Yeah?
yes,
These were viewed as, because it really was because there's more renovation involved in them. inherently you're going to have some limitations, which will show up. But in the next go-around, these are going to be graded.
Make those more green.
They may become more green in the next go-around. Relative
That's why
to
we
these,
went down to
they're not
4.
going to be.
You're looking at the 2
There's
renovations.
most likely going to be something in those that comes through.
Because to me,
Can I make a motion to adjourn?
this means nothing.
We haven't,
Well, we have to.
I just wanted
do
to
something
revisit
real
the
nice.
schedule and just point out that we're meeting again on the 22nd, and the working group is meeting on the 16th. And cost estimates are coming in by the 12th, right?
no, on the
No.
2nd.
2nd of,
And then we'll have them shared on the 6th.
And everybody will have them on the 6th.
I'll send that
November
out
6th.
tomorrow morning.
so the meeting on the 6th is the
Oh, thanks,
one that
Tom.
we're going to have to select the option that we want to move forward with. Is that correct?
No, the 6th is the Friday. That's a working group meeting.
I mean, not the 6th, the
And the
one
12th.
in November.
12th, November 12th is the one.
November 12th, I'm sorry. The
Where
one
we'll
in
go
November is
through-
what I was going to say. The November 12th. Is that the election? That's not election
It's
day.
going to be a 7-hour meeting to narrow down to one preferred schematic.
That should be an interesting discussion.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second. All those in favor, aye. Thank you all.
Get to
Thanks,
one
Tim.
stand.
Aye.